What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another Four Corners video for today's four-game NBA slate, courtesy of Awesemo.com. It's going to be a tough slate today with some possible blowouts, some teams playing for playoff seeding, and also some teams who are on the front end of back-to-back who may need to let up the horses a little bit today. So like this video right now, give me your support, and today, comment which game you think is going to be the most fantasy fertile, which one's going to have the most fantasy points to go around. There's, again, some potential blowouts, some tough defensive spots, so give me your guess right now as to which game you think is going to have the most going on, and I will, of course, jump in later in the comments to talk with you guys. And at the end of the video, I'll have the winner of yesterday's guessing contest for Devin Booker's point total, so keep your eyes peeled there if you are a person who think you might have won that special shout out. The first corner I want to hit on is a game with the Rockets visiting the Kings. This one is a 226.5 point combined total, which represents a 2.8 point boost for Houston and a 3.3 point drop for Sacramento. James Harden had 85.25 fantasy points in 38 minutes with a 51% usage rate versus the Kings over the weekend. The Rockets right now are trying to solidify their home court advantage in the first round. Right now they're in the 4 seed, but they could lose that, so they are playing for something. James Harden also playing for his shot at an MVP, even though it looks like it'll probably be Giannis. Harden is still in the mix, so I think Harden's going to go full motivation here. It's a great matchup against the Kings again, a pace-up spot, so I like Harden quite a bit today. Clint Capella's had 3 straight games over 40.75 fantasy points. It's a nice rebounding spot here versus the Kings, who are allowing a slate worst 48 rebounds per game. Again, a pace-up spot, a nice situation where defensively there isn't a lot of resistance on the Kings side that would inhibit Capella in any meaningful way. So I like Capella as well, and I'm okay playing him alongside Harden. Chris Paul is fine at a reasonable price, but he hasn't scored over 50 fantasy points in over a month now. I don't think he has the tournament upside you need. He's reasonable as a Harden pivot, but I think Harden's in a great spot. I'm not really trying to pivot off of him too much, so some exposure to Paul, okay, but I'm really not trying to get there a bunch because I don't think he has enough upside to win you a tournament. PJ Tucker and Eric Gordon are also both at fine prices, but to me, they're only playable if you're playing them as pivots to James Harden. Let's say James Harden doesn't score his usual crazy amount of points that he does, then maybe you'll see some more scoring for PJ Tucker, some more scoring for Eric Gordon, but otherwise these guys aren't guys I'm trying to get into a bunch of lineups. Tucker and Gordon really don't offer a ton of upside, so they're value plays, but really only value plays in concert with another fade of Harden. Marvin Bagley picked up the start in a game over the weekend versus the Rockets, and he had 20 shot attempts there as well. He's going to continue to get usage down the stretch. A lot of rookies towards the end of the year tend to be the focal points of their team, just so they could see where they lie before going into next season. I think Bagley can be good here. I think he also takes enough away from Willie Cauley-Stein to make him mostly unplayable, but Bagley's interesting to me here, and I think he does have some tournament upside. Buddy Hield's isolation game seems like a better fit to me than what De'Aaron Fox does. A little pace, a little bit of assisting. Really not a ton of assist upside versus this Rockets team who closes out pretty well on shooters. Buddy Hield, though, a guy who can score on his own, so I think he's in an okay position. Also cheaper than De'Aaron Fox by a substantial bit, so that makes him more appealing in pretty much every way to me. And Harrison Barnes and Bogdan Bogdanovic are both at reasonable prices, but I would question their tournament upside. Bogdan's shown a little bit more recently. Barnes hasn't shown much at all, really just riding out the stretch until the end of the year. So I don't mind Bogdan. I don't mind Barnes either, I guess, especially if you're playing a bunch of lineups, but neither guy really at one I'm trying to force into a bunch of lineups. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Hawks visiting the Spurs. This one is a 228.5 point combined total, which represents a 7.5 point boost for San Antonio and a 3.8 point drop for Atlanta. LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan are both at reasonable prices. The Vegas total here seems great, but I think there is some real risk for these guys given the fact that the Spurs are on a front end of a back-to-back with a very tough matchup against the Nuggets to come tomorrow. So a Spurs team who might be resting their guys a little or maybe not going full effort today. It seems like a vintage Coach Popovich situation. So I'm worried a little bit about Aldridge and DeRozan. I think if you want to come close to the field on them, that's fine, but I would probably come a little bit under just because I think they may not see their full run today. Derek White had 50.5 fantasy points the last time he played Atlanta. It's a better spot today because there's just less bodies on the Hawks side. White could also, I guess, get a minutes crunch, but I think as a younger player, he's more inclined to see more opportunity than Aldridge and DeRozan will. The fact that also that Derek White is at the same price as Bryn Forbes, I'd much rather have Derek White with what he does on the court, a lot more peripherals. Bryn Forbes is a fine 3-point shooting matchup, but I'm not trying to pay $4,600 for Bryn Forbes, so I'm okay with Derek White today, and I would definitely prefer him over Forbes. Rudy Gay is a fine play, but I think his upside's a bit questionable here with a back-to-back, as well as the fact that he just hasn't had a crazy high ceiling recently at his price. I think I'd rather go to a guy like Marco Bellinelli as a value. He can score in bunches, and I think he may need to score in bunches here if we do see the starters light up a bit. So Bellinelli interests me. Gay is fine, but I think I'd be more inclined to go with somebody a little bit cheaper. On the Hawks side, Trae Young should have a lot of usage to go around with no John Collins and no Dwayne Dedmon out there. Trae Young's been over 41.5 fantasy points in 6 straight games. He's doing a lot scoring, he's doing a lot assisting, and the Spurs have been pretty bad versus lead guards recently, so that should also benefit Trae Young here in a spot where he can do whatever he wants as long as game doesn't blow out. Kevin Huerter could also benefit a bit from the lack of bodies. The Spurs are giving up a slate high 36.2% from 3, which is not a great total, but it is good enough to be the highest on the slate. So Huerter, an interesting spot here. Whenever there's a usage vacuum, I think he tends to do well. I think there's some other guys who could pick up that usage, so there's some risk for Huerter, but a guy worth having some lineups in case he does have that tournament upside. Justin Anderson had 50.5 fantasy points versus Milwaukee last game, and he got there with points and rebounding. The rebounding shouldn't be quite as good this game, and frankly, it's hard to see Justin Anderson having a 50-point ceiling too many times in a year, but he's been minutes capped for most of the year, and he actually has been a productive permanent player both for the Hawks and in previous stints around the league. So Justin Anderson, to me, an interesting guy, and I think I will have some exposure to him given the fact that there are just less bodies on the wing for the Hawks right now. Alex Len should see big minutes with no Dwayne Dedmon and no John Collins out there. Len picked up the start last game, and the Spurs do have some size inside, which would need to have Len out there. I think Deonta Davis is a viable pivot to Len in case Len falters, gets in foul trouble, the various ways that Alex Len can fail. You could also see Vince Carter pick up some minutes if they decide to go small, but Davis, I think, may end up playing alongside Len for stretches. I'm not sure about that, but I think there's a chance that happens given the size on the Spurs side. So I think I'm interested in Len. I'm less interested in Davis, but still have a little interest. And Vince Carter's a guy I think I could see playing on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, I don't know if he's going to have the upside for you, so maybe some exposure, but not a guy I'm trying to get to a lot. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Lakers visiting the Thunder. This one is a 224.5 point combined total, which represents a 6.3 point boost for the Thunder and a 6-point drop for the Lakers. Paul George and Russell Westbrook are in a great spot with reasonable prices for both. Again, it's going to be a high-paced game versus the Lakers, so that should benefit both well. The issue, though, is there's a 12-point spread favoring the Thunder at home, and the Lakers just really don't have a lot of horses left on their side with LeBron out for the year. Kyle Kuzma also questionable, even though he's not that good of a player. He does help a little bit prop things up, so you really need a Laker on the other side if you are going to play Paul George and Russell Westbrook because there's a decent chance this one does blow away. Steven Adams has had over 47.25 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games. He's in a good spot again here, a poor rebounding team, a lot of pace. Adams is a guy who can have some really poor floor showings in terms of tournament upside, so I would worry a little bit about him. I think just matching the field on him again makes sense because he does have that upside, but also a pretty bad downside. So Adams a fine play, but a guy who I really wouldn't want to trust at a high volume. Jeremy Grant's workload has been up recently. He's been shooting upwards of 16 times in some games, even with George and Westbrook out there. So Jeremy Grant, guy is okay here. It's still just a secondary option, though. I think a guy you're not trying to dig too deep for, but if you have him in some lineups, he's probably fine. Dennis Schroeder also interests me a bit here. He's got some potential in a blowout. He also just has some potential in case Westbrook falters in that first unit, and a lot of the scoring punch ends up coming from the second unit of the Thunder. Just a lot of opportunity here for Schroeder in a pace-up spot, going against Alex Caruso for more time than not. It's a nice spot for Schroeder, but not a guy, again, you want a ton of, but a guy to have some exposure to, I would say. Rajon Rondo's had over 50 fantasy points in his last 2, and there is some upside here with assists versus the Thunder. I think the risk here is what we saw last game with Rondo, where he came out 4 minutes into the second half. They brought in Alex Caruso, then they ended up bringing out Rondo for one more stint, even though it seemed like they were just going to go with the young guys for the second half. Not sure what the deal was there. I think there is some risk to Rondo's minutes, but without LeBron out there, he's been the main playmaker, the main guy doing everything. So I like Rondo here, especially in lineups in which we have Thunder guys, and we're banking on the Lakers to keep it close. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has had at least 14 shots in 5 out of his last 7 games. The opportunity should be there for him again, and he'll be even better if Kyle Kuzma, who's currently questionable, or ruled out. But Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, fine to me if Kuzma's in, but better to me if Kuzma is out. JaVale McGee still also looks solid despite his price being up. He's been a really good per-minute guy with LeBron off the floor. His run has been continuing even though his price is up, so I really don't have an issue with McGee here. Not the best spot, but not as bad of a spot as people may think versus Steven Adams, so another guy I would consider if we're playing lineups with the Lakers, which we're hoping they keep it close for the Thunder. Alex Caruso had 44.75 fantasy points on 7 for 11 shooting versus the Pelicans. I think he's playable in spots in which you're not playing Rondo, and I think also Kyle Kuzma, if he were ruled out, should open up some more opportunity for Caruso. Caruso, though, a hard guy for me to bank on with his price coming up, so I'd really only be inclined to play him in lineups without Rondo, perhaps on the assumption that the Thunder blows this one out. And the last corner I want to hit on is a game with the Nuggets visiting the Warriors. This one is a 219.5 point combined total, which represents a 4-point drop for the Warriors and a 5.2 point drop for the Nuggets. Neither Steph Curry nor Kevin Durant have scored over 50 fantasy points versus the Nuggets this year. That certainly could flip, but the fact that the Nuggets are a pretty good defensive team who knows how to shut down star players worries me enough. I think I'd prefer Curry out of the two, though it's really close. But overall, though, there are enough concerns for me where I probably won't have a lot of these guys in lineups tonight. Klay Thompson, on the other hand, has had 58.75 and 44.25 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Nuggets. So he's been the guy who's been getting less defensive attention. Obviously, I think that should continue. I would say that there's more worry for Durant, more worry for Curry, even some concern about Cousins, where if you're a defender on the Nuggets, you're going to want to really attack those guys. Klay Thompson's going to do what he does. I think if you let him score a bunch, but you limit the other guys, you could pick up a win here, and I think that's the way the Nuggets will approach it. DeMarcus Cousins had 46.5 fantasy points in his 1 game versus the Nuggets this year. He's at a good price again. It's a reasonable spot. I really have no issue going back to DeMarcus Cousins today. Draymond Green is cheap enough to have value, but he hasn't scored over 40 fantasy points since February 25th versus Charlotte, so the upside's not really there, especially in games with Cousins out there. Really don't love Draymond, but if he gets you somewhere you need to, he's a decent value play, just not a guy who I think has that tournament ceiling that you're looking for. Nikola Jokic hasn't scored over 46.25 fantasy points versus the Warriors this year. The usage is there, the opportunity is there, but defensively they've done a good job versus him, so Jokic is fine to me, but I do have some concerns overall about pretty much everybody in this game. Jamal Murray is probable with his ankle issue that knocked him out of his last game, but it's a good spot for him. He's getting the most usage out of the secondary pieces on the Nuggets reliably game to game. So Murray's a guy who can spike an upside at any time. He'd be the one I'd be comfortable having exposure with outside of Jokic the most. Will Barton, Gary Harris, and Paul Millsap all grade out pretty similarly to me. They're tournament dart guys who are maybe going to get you there if this game goes their way, but there's a lot of risk that they just don't see the opportunity. So I don't love any of the three, but I think if they work price-wise for you, I would put them in lineups, just not guys I'm dying to get to. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's slate. Right now, like the video and leave a comment down below. Tell me which game you think is going to be the most fertile for fantasy points. Maybe you think the Spurs are going to bring it today versus the Hawks, or that this Warriors-Nuggets game is going to be less defensively obtrusive than I think it's going to be. Tell me what you're thinking right now, and like the video and leave a comment. And the big winner from our contest yesterday is Courtney Scruggs, who did this guess here. 24 real-life points for Devin Booker. Devin Booker put up just 25 yesterday. A lot of assist upside in that game, but the scoring not quite there for him, so great job, Devin Booker. They did win, though, so good job, Devin Booker. Good job, Courtney. Everybody's a winner except for the people who rostered Devin Booker last night. And as always, check the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'll drop it in here right now. It'll give you half off your first month at Awesemo.com. All the ownership projections and rankings from Awesemo in the NBA. If you get an all-sport package, you also get all of our MLB content, all the rankings and ownership there as well. Premium articles too, so go check that out now. Use the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'll be back again tomorrow with another Four Corners video, so good luck.